The devil does not knock, he waits inside, pretending to be gone. That was something Father Elias used to say when he visited our parish as a guest speaker, always with a grim smile that made me wonder what he had seen. I never understood what he meant back then, not until I met him years later and heard the story he had carried alone for over a decade. It started when he was sent to a remote village in the mountains, a quiet place with stone houses, old trees, and people who still rang church bells for the dead. A family there had begged the church to send someone. Their son, Matteo, had changed overnight. He spoke in voices that were not his own and knew things he could not possibly know. They had already tried doctors and local healers, but nothing helped. So the church sent Father Elias, young and full of faith, thinking it would be difficult but manageable. He had trained for exorcisms before, had studied the rituals, the prayers, the warnings, but no training prepares you for the moment. A boy looks into your eyes and says your name in a voice that sounds like it crawled out of a well filled with ash. The ritual took 3 days. Each night, they would tie Matteo to the bed with ropes soaked in holy water, and Father Elias would pray until his voice cracked. The room grew cold, the lights flickered, and the boy screamed until the walls bled with scratches. On the final night, everything went still. Matteo gasped like he was drowning, and then he collapsed into silence. The room warmed up, and for the first time in days, his mother cried tears of relief. Father Elias thought it was over. The family thanked him, the villagers gifted him with bread and fruit, and he returned to his church feeling like he had truly helped someone. But something had followed him back. At first, it was just dreams, strange ones. He would see a long hallway with doors that opened by themselves. Shadows moved just out of reach, and then there was the voice, deep, wet, crawling through his ears. It whispered the same thing every time. You freed him. Now I am yours. He tried to ignore it. He prayed harder. He fasted. He confessed. But the voice did not stop. Then he started waking up in different places. Once, he found himself kneeling in the dark corner of the church, not remembering how he got there. Another time, he woke up at the cemetery gate, barefoot and shivering, with soil under his fingernails. He stopped sleeping altogether, afraid of what he might do next. He asked the church for help, but they only told him to rest. They said stress from exorcisms could play tricks on the mind. No one believed him, not even his closest friends. So he began keeping notes. He wrote everything down in a little red notebook: times, dates, dreams, voices. He even recorded himself sleeping. That is when he heard it for the first time outside of his dreams. The guttural voice, clear and cruel, breathing through the speaker as he slept. I am in you now, priest. Father Elias said that was when he finally understood. The ritual had not banished the demon. It had only moved it from Matteo into himself. That is why the boy had recovered so quickly. That is why the voice sounded the same. He did not cast it out. He invited it in, and now it was growing stronger. One night, he dreamed of a mirror. Inside it, his reflection smiled with rotting teeth and black eyes. The reflection whispered, soon. When he woke up, the mirror in his room was shattered. Blood lined the edges, but there were no cuts on his body. He burned the red notebook, thinking it might sever the link, but the dreams continued. The voice became bolder. It started speaking while he was awake, whispering during Mass, taunting him during confession. Once, during a sermon, he looked down at the crowd and could not remember a single face. Everyone looked like they were melting, their skin sliding off like wax. He ran off the pulpit and vomited behind the altar. One night, he felt something watching him, not from the shadows, but from inside. He described it as standing in front of a well and realizing something down there was climbing up, scraping its way through his ribs. He locked himself in the church, poured holy water in a circle around him, and read the same exorcism he had used on Matteo. But it did not work. The voice only laughed, and then it showed him what it wanted, a memory that was not his. He saw Matteo, before the exorcism, looking into a cracked mirror and whispering, "Take him instead. He is stronger." The deal had been made long ago. The demon had not been forced out. It had been traded, chosen, accepted. Father Elias was not the hero. He was the replacement, the sacrifice. After that night, he stopped doing mass. He moved into a small house near the forest and rarely spoke to anyone. He told me this story while gripping a rosary so hard his knuckles were white. He said he could still feel it, waiting, whispering, feeding. He had learned to live with it, but not to silence it. And sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he could still hear Matteo's voice, thanking him from a distance. I asked him why he never tried to do another exorcism on himself. He just smiled, tired and hollow, and said, "Because it is not inside me anymore. It is me now." I left that day with a heavy heart, but a week later, I received a letter from a different priest who had taken over the area. Father Elias had vanished. The door was open, candles still burning, and a single phrase was written on the mirror in ash. "You freed him. Now I am yours." Since then I have heard stories. People say they see a man walking through the forest at night, dressed in black robes, muttering prayers backward. Sometimes, during Mass, priests report losing their place in Scripture, as if something is pulling the words away from them. And once, during a late confession, I swear I heard breathing behind me, though the booth was empty. I do not know if Father Elias is still out there. I do not know if what took him is waiting for someone new. But sometimes, when I sleep, I dream of a hallway with doors, and one of them always creaks open, just a little more each time. Some things in the church were never meant to be holy. That is what Father Lucian once whispered to me, a sentence that stayed with me long after he disappeared. He was an old priest who lived in the hills of southern France, guarding a tiny stone chapel that most people had forgotten about. The church was centuries old, the kind of place that felt colder than it should be, even in summer. It had been passed down from one priest to another for over 400 years, and the records were sparse. Father Lucian had served there for most of his life, and he was known for his discipline. He kept strict routines, especially his midnight prayers. Every night at exactly 12, he would light a candle, kneel before the crucifix, and begin his quiet prayer. It gave him peace. But one night, something changed. He said he felt watched, not in the way people sometimes do when they are alone in the dark, but in a way that made his skin crawl. And then, the next night, it happened again. The crucifix at the front of the chapel had always been there. It was carved in the 17th century, with fine details, and a strangely intense face. Most people never looked too closely, but Father Lucian began to notice something odd. When he walked past the statue, he felt like the eyes were following him. At first he laughed it off, blaming lack of sleep, or maybe just the flicker of candlelight. But as the nights went on, the feeling grew worse. It became so strong that he started turning his back to the statue during prayer, just so he would not have to see those carved eyes, but they still stared. One night, while kneeling in silence, he looked up and swore he saw the eyelids shift, just slightly, like a twitch. It happened so fast he questioned if he had imagined it. But then, the next night, he saw it again. This time, a slow blink. He jumped back, heart pounding, and for the first time in years he stopped the prayer halfway through. He approached the crucifix, shaking, searching for strings or movement. Nothing. The statue was solid, no cracks, no tricks. He touched the eyes. They felt wrong. Not like wood or paint, but softer, like dried skin. Something about them made him feel sick. He climbed up onto the altar table to look closer and saw something that made his breath freeze. The eyes were not painted, they were real human eyes, dried and yellowed with age, sealed perfectly into the face of Christ. He stumbled back in horror, unsure what he had just uncovered. He spent the entire night digging through the old church records, trying to find out where the crucifix had come from. He found a faded journal, written by a priest from the year 1674. Most of it was unreadable, but one entry stood out. It said, he would not confess. He refused to look away. Now he will watch until the end. That was all. No names, no explanations. The next few nights were worse. He stopped praying at midnight. He avoided the chapel after dark, but the eyes still blinked. Sometimes he saw it in the reflection of the stained glass. Sometimes he heard a soft whisper that came from the altar. Once he tried to call the bishop to report it, but the line went dead the moment he said the word eyes. Then came the smell. It was faint at first, like old meat or wet soil, but it grew stronger. He searched every corner of the church for a dead animal or rotting food, but found nothing. It always led back to the crucifix. He could not sleep. The whispering started happening in his dreams too, dragging him into strange places where walls bled and shadows moved backward. Every time he woke up, the church bell would ring once, even though the rope was never touched. Finally, he could not take it anymore. He decided to remove the crucifix. He wrapped it in a cloth and carried it down to the old crypt beneath the chapel. He thought if he buried it, sealed it away, the horror would stop. But as he reached the bottom of the steps, he tripped. The crucifix cracked against the stone floor. One of the eyes fell out. When he picked it up, it blinked in his hand. He dropped it and ran. He locked the crypt door and nailed it shut, praying to God to forgive whatever sin had caused this nightmare. But it was too late. That night, he awoke to the sound of someone walking upstairs. Slow, heavy steps. He checked the locks. Everything was sealed, but when he turned around, he saw muddy footprints leading from the crypt to the chapel doors. He never went back down. In the following days, he began seeing things in the corners of his vision, faces pressed against the windows, shadows shaped like crucifixes crawling along the walls, and every time he passed a mirror, he saw a pair of eyes behind him, staring without blinking. He wrote letters to the Vatican, begging for help, but no one responded. People who visited the chapel said they felt sick or dizzy. Some said they saw the statue breathing. Eventually, no one came anymore. Then one day, he vanished. The church caretaker arrived for his weekly check-in and found the chapel empty. The crucifix was gone. The crypt door was torn off the hinges, and the walls inside were covered in scratches. Human fingernails were found on the floor. Weeks later, a group of workers restoring an old cathedral in Lyon found something strange inside a hollow statue of Saint Peter. It was a crucifix, sealed in wax and wrapped in cloth. The eyes had rotted away, but the sockets were empty and damp. A note was tied to it with a single sentence: "He refused to confess. Now he watches through me." No one could trace the handwriting. No one ever saw Father Lucien again. But to this day, priests who serve alone in remote chapels sometimes report odd feelings during prayer. They say, "It feels like someone is watching, like the eyes on the cross are too real." Some even say they have seen them blink, and when they try to leave, they hear a whisper from behind the altar, "Do not look away." Some bells are meant to be rung by hands that are no longer living. That was the first thing Father Mathieu heard when he arrived at St. Leontius Church, a quiet stone chapel nestled in a forgotten corner of a French countryside village. He was newly appointed, eager and optimistic, ready to serve a community that had gone too long without a steady priest. The villagers were kind, but distant. They welcomed him politely, offered small gifts of food and wine, but always looked at the church with uneasy eyes. When he asked about it, most changed the subject, or offered vague warnings. One old woman told him, "Do not stay up too late. The church is not empty at night." He thought she was just trying to scare him. At first everything seemed normal. He held sermons, blessed the homes, helped the sick, but then, on the fifth night, it happened. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the church bell rang, once, then twice, then three slow, deep chimes that echoed across the village, like a warning. He woke with a start, sat up in his small room beside the chapel, and listened. Silence. He thought maybe it was the wind, or a faulty rope, but the next night, it rang again. And the next, always at 2:17. Always three chimes. The bell tower was old, and there was no automatic mechanism. It had to be rung by hand. So on the seventh night, he stayed awake, watching the tower through his window. Right on time, the bell rang. Three chimes, but no one entered or exited the tower. He ran outside in the cold and climbed the narrow stairs to the top. The rope was still. The air was still. There was no one there. He checked the lock the next day. It was old but worked fine. He even placed a bell of his own on the tower stairs, so he would hear if anyone tried to go up, but nothing ever triggered it. Yet the bell kept ringing. Some nights, the sound was louder, heavier, almost angry. Others it sounded weak, like it was coming from far away. He asked the locals again, but this time, their fear was more obvious. A farmer finally told him the story. Decades ago, a priest named Father Henry had collapsed during a sermon and died at the altar. Some say it was his heart. Others believed it was something far darker. They whispered that he had uncovered something he was not supposed to, something buried beneath the altar stone. After his death, the bell began ringing. No one could stop it. The church was closed for years, until now. Father Matthew felt a chill run down his spine, but he still believed there had to be a logical reason. He searched the bell tower from top to bottom. He even stayed up, night after night, waiting to catch whoever was doing it. But he never found anyone, and slowly, the ringing began to affect him. He could not sleep. He started hearing whispers at night, soft voices speaking in Latin, repeating the same phrase, "Below the altar, he waits." He tried praying harder. He sprinkled holy water in every corner, but the bell kept ringing. Then came the dreams. In them, he saw Father Henry standing at the pulpit, his eyes wide open, his mouth full of dirt. Each time, the old priest raised a shaking hand and pointed toward the altar. When Matthew woke up, his hands were always covered in dust. On the 10th night, he decided to lift the altar stone. It was not easy. The stone was heavy, and it had not been moved in decades. But he was desperate. Beneath it, he found something that should not have been there. A wooden hatch, sealed with a rusted iron lock. When he broke it open, the smell hit him first, damp, old, like forgotten graves. He lowered himself into the dark chamber below, and found a small room, hidden beneath the chapel. At the center was a coffin. It was covered in strange symbols and lined with thick chains, but one of the chains had snapped, and inside the coffin, there was no body, only a priest's robe, folded neatly, and a pair of black shoes. As he stood there in shock, the bell rang again, louder than ever before, shaking the ground. He scrambled out of the hole, and ran up to the tower, expecting to finally see someone there. But when he reached the top, the bell was not moving. Yet the sound was deafening. It was coming from inside his head. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his ears, and saw something standing in the corner. It looked like Father Henry, but his face was wrong. His eyes were missing, and his mouth opened far too wide. He spoke without sound, lips forming the same words from the dream. "You should not have opened it." Then everything went dark. When he woke, he was lying at the foot of the altar. The villagers had found him screaming in his sleep. They begged him to leave the church, to run while he still could, but he could not. The bell still rang every night at 2:17. Only now, he heard the voice too. It followed him in the halls, whispered from the pews, echoed from the walls. He tried to seal the hatch, to forget what he had seen, but it was too late. He had disturbed something that had been locked away for a reason, and each night, when the bell rang, he felt it rising again. Something old, something angry, something that used to wear the robes of a priest and now wanted them back. In his final letter, written with shaky hands and left on the chapel floor, Father Matthew wrote, "The bell rings for me now. I hear it even in the silence. Do not answer it. Do not open the altar. Pray for me. Pray that I can keep him sealed a little longer." He was never seen again. When the bishop sent others to investigate, they found the altar sealed tight and the bell rope missing, but on the wall of the bell tower, scratched deep into the stone, were the words "Still here, still ringing." And every night since, at exactly 2:17, the bell rings 3 times, even though the tower is empty and the church doors are locked. Confession is meant to free the soul, but what if the soul never left? That was the thought that haunted Father Louis every night. After what happened in the old stone church of St. Helena, it was a peaceful place, quiet, and tucked away in a small village where everyone knew each other by name. Father Louis had only been there for a few months, but he already felt close to the people. They trusted him, and he took comfort in the rhythm of daily prayers, baptisms, and confessions. He often said that hearing confessions was the most sacred part of his duty. People came with their pain, and he helped them let go of their guilt. But everything changed on a gray November evening, when a little girl entered the confessional booth. She was crying softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She said her name was Isabel. She could not be more than 8 or 9 by the sound of her voice. She said she needed forgiveness for something terrible. Father Louis leaned forward, gently asking what she had done. The girl paused, and then said, "I killed my father." Her voice shook, and she began to cry harder. Father Louis froze. He thought maybe it was a game, or a prank. Children sometimes said strange things, but there was something about her tone that felt too real, too broken. He asked her why she had done it, and she replied, "He used to hurt me. I was scared. I did not mean to, but I pushed him down the stairs. He never got up." For a long moment, Father Louis said nothing. The confession was too serious to ignore, but she was just a child. He gently asked her where her parents were now. She whispered, "I have been alone for a long time," wanting to help her. He opened the curtain between the booths to speak with her face to face, but the booth was empty. There was no one there. He stood up quickly, checked around the church, looked outside, even called out her name, but there was no sign of her. The door had never opened, no footsteps, just silence. He told himself it must have been his imagination, or maybe someone had snuck out very quietly, but deep down, he knew something was not right. That night, he could not sleep. He kept thinking about the girl's voice, the way she cried, the way her guilt felt too heavy for someone her age. The next day, he asked around the village about any girl named Isabel. One elderly woman went pale when he mentioned the name. She said, "There used to be an Isabel, many years ago. Her father was a cruel man. People knew, but no one did anything. One night, he fell down the stairs and broke his neck. They said it was an accident." Father Louis felt his stomach tighten. He asked how long ago it happened. The woman said, "Almost 40 years now. Isabel died shortly after. She never spoke again. She stopped eating, just stared into space. They buried her beside her mother." The priest felt the room grow colder. He thanked the woman and walked back to the church slowly, unsure of what he was starting to believe. Over the next week, He could not stop thinking about Isabel. He even went to the graveyard and found a small headstone with her name. The date matched what the woman had said. She had died just days after her father. He said a prayer over her grave and tried to forget the whole thing. But the next Friday evening, just before sunset, he heard someone enter the church. Light footsteps. He sat in the confessional, waiting, and then the same soft voice, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." It was Isabel again. She sounded even sadder this time, and her voice shook with fear. "He found me," she said. "I thought I was safe here, but he still comes in my dreams. He drags me back to the stairs." Father Louis' hands trembled. He asked her what she meant. She replied, "He never left the house. I see him at night. He waits at the bottom step. I try to run, but I fall again and again." Her voice broke into sobs. Father Louis could not take it anymore. He opened the curtain again. Empty, nothing but shadows and silence. He fell back in his seat, heart pounding. This time he felt something pass through the air, cold and heavy, like grief itself. He spoke with the bishop, who told him that sometimes spirits cling to the place of their greatest suffering. He suggested a cleansing prayer, a way to help Isabel move on. That night, Father Louis knelt before the confessional and began to pray. He read scripture, lit candles, and whispered Isabel's name, asking her to find peace. But the moment he said the words, "You are free," the church grew icy. A loud crash echoed through the nave, and every candle went out. In the darkness, he heard the sound of footsteps running upstairs, then down, over and over, then a scream, a child's scream, cut short by a loud wet thud. When the light returned, the confessional door had swung open by itself. He walked toward it slowly and found a single child's shoe lying on the floor, muddy, old. He picked it up with shaking hands. That night he dreamed of the staircase Isabel spoke of. He saw her running, crying, chased by a tall shadow. He tried to reach her, but he was frozen, helpless. The shadow grabbed her, and she fell, again and again. Each time he heard her say, "Forgive me, Father, I just wanted it to stop." When he woke, the shoe was gone. Father Louis still hears her sometimes, especially on rainy nights. She whispers from the confessional, but he no longer opens the curtain. He just listens, he prays, and he hopes one day she will stop returning. But deep down, he knows why she comes back. She does not want forgiveness. She wants to be believed. She wants someone to hear her truth. And as long as she is trapped in that moment, falling down those stairs, she will keep coming back to confess what she should never have had to carry alone. In his final sermon, before leaving the village, Father Louis said, "We are not just guardians of the living. Sometimes, we are all the forgotten souls have left." Then he locked the church for the last time, and as he walked away, he heard a soft voice behind him say, "Thank you." But when he turned, there was only wind. Not all books are meant to be read, especially the ones that read you back. That was the warning Father Gabriel remembered after everything that happened with the widow's Bible. It started like any other pastoral visit, a quiet knock at the church's back door, and a woman dressed in mourning black asked to speak with him. Her name was Eleanor. Her husband had passed away recently, and she was sorting through old belongings. She found a family Bible that she said no one had touched in years. It had belonged to her grandfather, a priest who had once served in a different parish before being cast out by the church. She spoke softly, almost nervously, as if unsure whether she should even be handing the book over. She said it always made her uneasy, that strange things happened when it was near, and that it belonged somewhere holy again. Father Gabriel accepted it with calm reassurance, not thinking much of it at first. It looked like any other old Bible. The leather cover worn but intact, the pages yellowed with time. He thanked her, blessed her, and placed the Bible in his study. That night, he decided to flip through its pages before bed. At first, the words looked normal, but as he turned to the Gospel of John, he noticed that the lines did not seem to follow their usual order. Verses were swapped, passages repeated, and some sentences made no sense at all. He chalked it up to printing errors or age. He set the book aside and went to sleep, but the next night, he opened it again, and this time, something was different. The words on the page moved, not like a trick of the eye, but as if the ink itself was crawling. Letters shifted, reshaped, and rearranged into new sentences. He stared in disbelief as the words spelled out, "You should not have opened this." He slammed the book shut and backed away. The next morning, he convinced himself it had been a dream or a case of tired eyes. He went about his day, met with parishioners, and avoided thinking about the Bible. But something had changed. The air in his study felt heavy, cold. He began hearing faint whispers whenever he passed the bookshelf where the Bible rested. He tried moving it to another room, but the whispers followed. At night, he would wake to find the Bible open on his desk, always turned to strange passages that read like curses rather than scripture. One night, it spelled out, "I was silenced, you will listen." Curious and disturbed, Father Gabriel dug into Eleanor's family history. He reached out to the diocese archives and eventually uncovered the name of her grandfather, Father Malric. The records were brief, but troubling. He had been excommunicated for preaching doctrine that was considered heretical, claiming that the true voice of God had been hidden from the Bible, and that the original texts spoke of a second revelation that had been buried to keep mankind blind. Some said he had started writing his own verses. Others claimed he had gone mad. He was never seen again after leaving the church. His final sermon ended with him screaming that the words spoke to him, that they burned with truth. With dread in his heart, Father Gabriel returned to the Bible. He opened it and asked aloud, "What do you want from me?" The pages fluttered, though the room was still. They landed on a single line written in red ink, "Free my voice." From that moment, the Bible no longer needed to wait until night. The pages moved on their own. Words twisted violently, spelling warnings like "Do not trust the church," and "I still speak." The priest felt his prayers grow weaker. The crucifix on his wall began to tilt each day no matter how many times he fixed it. A scent like burned pages filled the room constantly. He reached out to the bishop for help, but when they visited, the Bible looked normal. Nothing moved, nothing whispered. He began to question his own mind. He stopped sleeping. His sermons grew darker. People noticed, and rumors spread. One afternoon, as he read from a passage during Mass, the words on the Bible in his hands changed in real time. He paused, horrified, as it spelled out, "Lies from the altar." He dropped the book, and it landed with a loud thud. Everyone stared. He said it was a mistake, that he was unwell, but the damage was done. That night, he opened the Bible one last time and shouted at it, demanding to know what it was. The lights went out. He could feel a presence fill the room. The Bible opened to the final page, where words were carved into the paper, almost scratched into the surface. "He who silenced me buried truth beneath this church. Bring it to light." Shaking, Father Gabriel remembered the old basement chamber beneath the chapel, sealed off years ago for repairs that were never finished. He took a lantern and forced open the heavy door. Dust and silence filled the air. As he searched, he found a loose section of the stone floor. Beneath it, wrapped in rotted cloth, were dozens of old pages, handwritten, not scripture, but notes, confessions, warnings. They were from Father Malric. He wrote about the voices in the Bible, about a truth that had been erased by fear. He said the words begged to be heard, that they held knowledge too powerful for the weak-minded. Father Gabriel took the pages and returned to the study. He set the Bible beside them and began to read aloud. The walls creaked. The whispers became clearer. They said, "Yes, now you see." The ink on the Bible's pages began to bleed across the paper, forming symbols he had never seen. For the first time, he understood what Malric had meant. The Bible was not cursed, it was a door, and every time someone opened it with the right eyes, the door opened wider. He closed it and locked it away, sealing the pages in a hidden chamber. But it was too late. He could still hear the voice at night, calm and cold. "You freed me. You believed. Now speak for me." Father Gabriel left the priesthood shortly after. He never returned to the church. He warned others to never open strange books, and to never accept gifts from grieving widows whose family histories are filled with silence. He said the voice never truly left him. It lives in ink, in old parchment, in forgotten scripture, and it waits for someone else to listen, someone brave or foolish, someone who will open the Bible and not close it in time.